Hi, my name is Andrew Roberts, and this is my presentation on IMAP and DNS. IMAP is an email protocol that IMAP stands for Internet Message Access Protocol. It is used much like POP3 to retrieve information from the server. However, unlike POP3, it maintains a copy of the email on the server and just downloads that copy to each client that connects to it. This creates a copy of the same email on any device that connects to the email server. DNS stands for Domain Name System. It is a name resolution service. It takes a domain name and translates it to the machine-specific IP address. In Windows, it uses IIS, and in Linux, we're going to be using bind. As I said before, IMAP maintains a copy of every email on the system. This allows the information to be synchronized across multiple devices. IMAP also honors a folder structure for organizing email messages, which is also synchronized across devices. To help harden IMAP, you want to enable user logging to monitor the connections of every user's send and receive. This allows you to get a feel for what user accounts are connecting, or if a malicious account is trying to brute force into the email server. It is also useful to limit the maximum number of connections to the server. If you know you only have about 50 email accounts, then you can easily limit those connections to something that seems reasonable to allow every email account to access theirs simultaneously. If you know that you only have 50 accounts and you're seeing 300 simultaneous connections, then somebody is likely trying to create a denial of service attack against your server. You also want to limit the use of plugins, such as email plugins that are using third-party code to do things that aren't expected by the server. Many of these plugins can be manipulated to cause harm to the server. You can also control idle timeout limits to ensure that the idle connections are dropped after a specific amount of time. And of course, you want to enable encryption on every connection and enforce this so that only encrypted connections are accepted. As before, DNS server resolves a domain name to a specific IP address. A recursive DNS server is used to resolve queries between DNS servers. This is used to, say, an ISP's DNS server will communicate with a local network's DNS server, and the local server will reach out to the ISP's DNS, and that will then say to your DNS server to continue out to the next DNS server to find out where the domain is resolved to an IP. A root name server is a DNS server that is aware of all the addresses that are located at the top level of each domain. to harden a DNS server in Windows, you want to ensure to enable a static IP address and create firewall rules that are specific to the DNS service on such as port 53, and ensure to limit access to this server. If it is only operating at a DNS server, that should pretty much be the only port that is allowed through the firewall to access the server specifically. You also want to activate the DNS security extensions within Windows. This helps you protect against resource utilization attacks and cache poisoning attacks. You also want to disable recursion to prevent against amplification attacks. You can also use Quad 9 DNS as a default DNS server to point your DNS server reaching out to access its DNS from Quad 9. Quad 9 is an open DNS server that has security in mind. It blacklists many malicious servers that are trying to share bad DNS information, and it puts security at the forefront. In Linux, you will be using bind to configure DNS. You want to make sure that bind is running as a non-root user account. Ensure that the permissions it has have been configured for each config file that bind is attempting to access. You also want to limit the DNS server to listen only on the specific port so that the service is the only thing getting through. You also want to limit recursive queries to only be accessible to trusted local clients. This includes IP addresses on your local network and loopback addresses. At this point, I want to thank you for listening to this presentation. Please give me feedback on anything that you feel I could add, and have a great night.